Hello again. Today I'm going to cover Node.js and Snap. Now Snap is a relatively new technology for Linux, and you can use it to install and manage Node.js on your Linux systems. I'm going to do a bit of a background on what snaps are, and I'm going to look at the Node.js snap, and then I'll give some thoughts and advice on where and how you should use snaps in your environment. Snap is a technology created by Canonical. They're the maintainers of the Ubuntu Linux distribution. And Snap is managed at snapcraft.io, which is technically the Snap store, where you can download snaps from and install them onto your computer. Now you'll see that snapcraft.io doesn't have the Ubuntu branding. That's because they intend this to be a universal app store for Linux, so not just Ubuntu. Snap ships with Ubuntu 16.04 and later. If you're running a recent version of Ubuntu, then there's a good chance that you have Snap already on your system and you can use it straight away without having to jump through any hoops. Snaps work obviously very well on Debian-based systems, so it's very easy and natural to install these on Debian and Linux Mint and a lot of other distributions that are forked off of either Debian or Ubuntu. Some of these distributions even have Snap installed on them by default, not just Ubuntu. You can also get Snap on Arch and Fedora and a couple of other popular distros. If you look on snapcraft.io, you can find documentation for installing Snap on a bunch of different operating systems. Notably, you'll see that Red Hat and CentOS are not listed on this list of operating systems. They are not currently supported. Now the Node Snap, if you use snapcraft.io/node, you will see we have a Snap for Node. And you can look into all versions and you can see we've got a bunch of Node versions here, and they correspond to the current active release lines for Node. And I'll show you how to install this later, but just know that this is actively maintained. I actually maintain this. It's under the Node source name. I'm not with Node source anymore, but I still maintain the Node Snap. So what does a snap give you that you can't get by using apt or yum or some other installer? Well, snaps are a little bit different to traditional install mechanisms. They are designed for applications rather than software components. Node sits on a boundary where it is often a component, but for developers particularly, it is an application. So if you look at the Snap store, you can see you can get all sorts of things like Spotify, you can get Slack, you can get VS Code. A whole lot of great applications are really easily installable with Snap. Snaps are auto-updating. They're also atomic and they are sandboxed by default. I'll explain a bit more about the technology as we go on. So I have a Linux terminal here, and it's a Ubuntu 18.04 machine. I have Snap installed on it, and I will show you how to install Node with Snap. It's a little bit complicated. This is documented on the web if you search for it. And I'll put it in the descriptions of this video as well. So if we do sudo snap install node, everything has to be done with sudo if you want to make changes. So we're going to install Node. Now it's not just as straightforward as installing Node, because for a start there's a bunch of choices you have to make about what version you're going to install. So we could install version 11, version 10, version 8, or version 6. I think version 9 is also in there, but that version 9 is pretty much dead now. So if we do sudo snap install node, we can say channel, and for the channel we put the Node version number. So if I say channel 10, so that's the latest LTS version of Node. I also have to do a classic flag as well. Now classic says that I want to use classic confinement, not standard confinement. I'm not sure why they call it classic, but I think classic is intended to mean it's like a classic application on your system. So there's essentially no strict confinement. Normally when you install a snap, it is sandboxed. It doesn't have access to a whole range of things on your system. It can only do a very limited set of things. So for example, Spotify can show you something on a GUI, it can connect to the web, and it can play with your audio. That's about it. It can't do file system stuff and a bunch of other things that keep it in a little sandbox. With Node, we want it to be unsandboxed because it's not very useful if it's just a sandboxed application. We want to be able to use it to run Node scripts, Node programs. So classic confinement is required. The Node Snap is set up so that if you do it without classic, it'll complain and say you need to use classic. So you have to be explicit and say classic. So let's run that. What it will do is it will talk to the Snap store, see what version is available. It says there's a Node version 10 stable available. It'll install that, mount it, and now it's available 10.13. So if I go Node-V, I've got that. So this is Node 10.13 that was released not too long ago. So I have Node 10.13 installed now. And what happens when there's Node 10.13.1 or 10.14 released? Well, as I said at the beginning of the video, snaps are auto-updating. That they check roughly every 6 hours for updates to all of the snaps that you have installed. If there are new versions, they will automatically get downloaded and installed. You won't even be aware of that happening. It just happens in the background nicely. And on the Node end, what we do is we check for releases regularly. I think it's roughly every hour. And when there's a release, we push it out to the canonical launchpad, which does a full compile, package, and publish to the Snap store. So you should get a new version of Node. Well, a new version of Node will be available in the store within roughly 2 hours of it being released upstream. And then it will be on your machine within 6 hours. You can do it manually. So if you know if a new version is out, you can use the refresh command. So you can do sudo snap refresh node, and that will do a explicit update for Node if there's one there. So not at the moment. Now the refresh command has other uses which are very helpful. So sudo snap refresh node, I can use refresh to switch channels, which is fantastic. So I'm not a user of Node version managers. I prefer to just have different versions of Node installed when I need them. And on my Linux system, snap is a great way of doing this. So I can say sudo snap refresh node, and I can say channel equals 11. It will then go and fetch the latest Node version 11 from the Snap store, install it on my machine if it's not already, and activate it so it's ready to go. And there's my Node version 11. Now the nice thing is, because I have 10 already installed, I can do that. It will do a check, but it doesn't need to download the latest because it knows what the latest is. So it's much quicker to switch back and forth between versions. As I said, the Node release lines are maintained as channels. If we do snap info node, we can see a bunch of information about the Node snap. Now, these are the channels that are available. We don't make use of the candidate and beta channel modifiers. I can't remember what they're called, but they're parts of channels. So we just use stable. So 11 stable will always have the latest Node version 11. So 11.2 was released only a few hours ago, I think, and it's now available in the 11 stable channel. And you'll see 11, 10, 9, 8, and 6. And when Node version 12 is available, there'll be a 12 channel as well. With most snaps, you would just want one version. So if you want Spotify, you would just install snap Spotify and it would give you the latest version. That would be done through this stable channel. There's just one version and it's the latest, and you get the latest. We don't use stable for Node because then what's going to happen when there's a new Node upgrade? You're going to get switched to a breaking version of Node. This is a policy that we decided a while ago for the Node Linux distributions to not automatically upgrade people on major version lines. So don't make a switch for people from 9 to 10, 10 to 11. You have to opt into these things because there are consequences. So it should be an explicit choice. So we don't use these primary channels here. We only use the custom ones with numbers. But there is this one called Edge, which we do use. So Edge actually pulls from the Node nightlies, which is daily builds from, well, nightly builds from the Node.js repo. It takes the latest commit at the time that it's built. It builds it and sticks it on the Node.js.org website. Snaps get updated within approximately 2 hours of that happening, and you get this Edge version of Node. So this one here is updated roughly every single day. So if I do sudo snap refresh node and I say Edge instead of channel, because Edge is a special channel, then it's going to go say, what's the latest version of Edge? And it will download that version of Node and install it for me. So I have Node version 12 nightly, which is a pre-12. It's not actually Node 12, it's just that version is incremented. And you can see there that that's what I've got installed. Now the nightly tag tells you that this was compiled on the 15th of November UTC, so that's roughly today. And this is the commit string. So if you wanted to look up exactly what commit was at the head of this release, then you could look that up in the Node.js repository and find that out. So that would update every day. If I came back and ran that command this time every day, I would get a new version of Node, and I wouldn't even be aware of it. And it would work and everything, but of course, buyer beware with the Node nightlies. They can include breaking changes, they often do, and there's no stability guarantees, so I wouldn't be using it for anything serious. They're interesting if you want to look at what's coming up with Node. Just don't use them for Node development or anything serious. So I'm going to put back to my 11 channel so that I have Node 11 installed, which is probably what I want to have on this development machine. Right, so how does this work on a Linux system? Let's have a look around and figure out how this thing works. So first of all, which node shows me that there's this special path on my system, snap bin. If I have a look in snap bin, I can see a bunch of snaps that I've installed, and they, including Node, and they all symlink into user bin snap, which is not very helpful. What's actually happening is that each snap has these wrapper commands. So when you invoke the command, it goes through snap, it loads the wrapper, and then executes the command. So there's a bit of indirection going on. That's mainly to support the sandboxing, but it's also to support the atomic installs. If you have a look in the snap directory, you will see that you have a bunch of your snaps installed there. You can see I've got Spotify on there and a bunch of other things. If you go into the Node directory and have a look at what's in there, there's some numbered directories. Now, these numbers correspond to the release ID in the Snap store. They're not very interesting for any other purpose other than just to keep them unique. So every version of Node that's put into the store gets a unique number, and this is going to increment over time. The interesting part of this is current is a symlink. So when you execute Node, it actually looks up what the current version of Node is by going into that directory. So it will actually be running snap node current bin node, and there's my 11 too. But if you ran any of those subdirectories, so for instance, I could do 1266 bin node, that's my 1013, and 1276 is, 79 is the nightly. So when I do a refresh, that's going to change the symlink. So you can see it points to the 1266 now. Yeah, so inside here, you can see a bunch of wrappers. So in the node snap, it has a primary node wrapper, which is just a shell script that just says how to invoke node and anything special. Now snaps can only export one primary command, and it has to be the same name as the snap. So the node snap has a node command, but you'll also note that if you do node tab for auto completion, you'll see there's a bunch of other things. So the node snap is actually exporting npm, yarn, and as of a few days ago, the npx command is also exported from the node snap. So they can be run just like that. It's not very idiomatic or useful. So snaps also support this thing called aliases. So that lets you get around this single export thing. You can either manually assign aliases, or you can get approval through the snap store, going through Canonical, to have your single snap able to install extra commands on the user's system. So it's a security thing. You don't just want a snap to come down and install and override cat and then have some security vulnerability. This is an explicit override. So if I run snap aliases, you can see that my node snap on this system aliases npm, npx, and yarn. And I can actually run them. What's actually in this directory is really not that interesting. It's basically a classic node install as if it was installed on a standard Ubuntu system. It's got your node commands. There's npm plus all the node modules directory that npm installs. So that brings me to this concept of atomic installs. So as I said, there is this symlinking system goes on. If you have a long-running application, let's take Spotify for instance. If I run Spotify on this system, it will load up a version and I could keep it running for days. But there might be an update to Spotify happening in the background. What Snap will do, it will download that, install it with this unique ID, and then switch the current symlink to the new version. But your existing version, all of the files are still there. They're not deleted while the application is still running. And I think there's a period of time, even when the application is not running, that the files are kept. They're eventually cleaned. But you can have multiple versions installed and even running on the system, and they won't be interrupted when there's an update. So that also gives you the ability to roll back, and it means that installs don't do this corrupting thing like with apt or yum or dnf, where they overwrite the files and you can get in this halfway state where things are corrupted and just don't run. Snaps do everything in one go, switch the symlink, so it's got that atomic nature. Okay, so you may have heard of snaps before, but you may have also heard of some similar technologies that are in roughly the same field. The two most common ones that are talked about are Flatpak and AppImage. And they're not the only ones. There's a bunch of other technologies that are competing in a similar field. One of the problems is, though, that it's very difficult to write comparisons about these different things. And you'll see a lot of articles comparing them, saying which one's better, which one's going to win. I actually don't think that's the way of looking at these things, because they all have very different objectives and they all use different technologies to achieve different aims. If you're comparing them, it's like comparing apples with oranges. I think the best approach is to say, what am I wanting to achieve and which one of these things does it best? If you go to the AppImage GitHub page, then you can actually see a breakdown of the difference between AppImage, Snap, and Flatpak. It's worth noting here, Flatpak was started by Red Hat, and it's maintained primarily by Red Hat. AppImage, as I said, is a community project, and Snap is by Canonical. So you can already see the competition between Canonical and Red Hat going on here. However, they're just not the same thing. If you look at Flatpak, they are much better suited for GUI applications. They are targeting that GUI environment, GUI wrappers, and they are very heavily sandboxed. So it's very much similar to what Windows have done with the whole Windows 10 and the store, and having these new style applications which are just running these very tight sandboxes. Flatpaks are a bit more similar to them. Snap will do a similar thing, but it's not its primary goal. It's just one of the features that it has. Running command line applications with Flatpak is just not quite the same, and doesn't have anything to do with running server processes, whereas snaps have this concept of running a daemon in there as well, so you could actually run a server process out of a snap. This page on the AppImage GitHub wiki actually has a bunch of comparisons between them, and you can't view this as this one's got more ticks, so therefore it's better. And I think AppImage has the most ticks on this page, as it so happens. It's more about what are you wanting to achieve, and so which one's better. I think snaps are better for the developer environment because they are distributed from a central store and they're auto-updating. Flatpak and AppImage have difficulties with that. AppImage, for a start, doesn't have a central store. Flatpaks are much more flexible in where you can get them from. With snaps, they are distributed via the snapcraft.io store, and it all just happens transparently. It's also very secure because it's partly curated, and it's an easy channel for us to publish Node and to get it out to user machines very quickly. It also, Node is not a GUI application, so if you are installing Spotify or Slack or Visual Studio Code, then maybe Flatpak would make sense. But Snap works just as well for me because I'm running Ubuntu. I tend to run Ubuntu. If you're running Fedora, then Flatpak might make more sense for you to run those things. But as far as I know, no one's put any work into a Node Flatpak because it just doesn't make sense as a bundle for that sort of thing. AppImage also doesn't make sense for Node because AppImage is a bundle format where you download a single file and it includes everything in it, including the libraries, and you just run that file, which is a really convenient way of distributing complex applications without having an install process. You just say download this file and run it. Great. Node already has that. If you just want to download the Node executable and run it, you could do that. So it's not really what people are after with Node. Okay, so some general thoughts on snaps and my advice for when and where to use them. I think snaps are great for developer machines. I love it, and if I did all of my development on Linux, I would be very happy. I do switch around between operating systems, particularly Mac OS. I do a little bit of Windows, but I tend to use Linux via Windows. So I'm not so worried there. But if I had snaps on Mac OS, I would be extremely happy. Brew is a little bit more complicated. I don't tend to use Brew for Node, but if I had Snap for Node on Mac OS, that'd be fantastic. So I really like it for development machines. However, Canonical try and sell snaps as good for server and IoT, particularly with server applications. I don't see snaps as a great way of installing Node for a production environment. The main problem being this auto-updating nature. You don't really want to have a production environment where the version could switch from day to day. So today we've released Node version 11.2. You've deployed on 11.1 and you've tested everything against 11.1. It's out there in production. You might get a application or a server restart in production and suddenly you're on 11.2 and you haven't tested 11.2. There may be some weird edge case that you're not aware of. So I wouldn't recommend snaps for production. I'd be interested in people doing IoT where the snaps make it easier to get Node onto your IoT devices, because they are shipped for ARM64 and ARM-HF as well. Desktop, certainly. Development environments for Node, it's a great way of installing and using Node. And that's all I have for you today about snaps. I hope you enjoyed that. I'd love your feedback. I'd love to know if you're using snaps, if you're using the Node snap. I'm always looking for ways to improve it. I really enjoy it, and so it would be great to hear your feedback.